Hi, this is Paul Fenn with another edition of Jeanneau Underway. Today I catch up with Jeanneau owners Will and Sarah Curry for a sail aboard the Sun Odyssey 349 on the Chesapeake Bay. I first met Will and Sarah totally by chance while attending the Pacific Sail and Power Show in Oakland, California. They were presenting to a packed house a seminar on tips and traps of cruising the West Coast, Mexico, and South Pacific.
At least be anchoring once a week, re-anchoring once a week so that you don't get that happening.
Especially if you're on the city side. On the Magoti side, it's not as bad, which is kind of the other side of the channel. And listen to your wife, because I told you the boat felt weird when we left, and you said, it's fine, honey.
You agree on that one.
Right?
As I watched them on stage, showing picture after picture of their amazing travels through the South Pacific, all I could think of was, how did my life go so terribly wrong? After all, here was this young couple who had already bought a boat and sailed across the Pacific to Australia before either one of them turned 30. Now on board the Sun Odyssey 349, my first question for them had to be, how did you guys pull this off?
So we spent a good 6 years saving all our pennies to buy our first sailboat, and we got married, and literally 3 months later I quit my job and we bought a boat in Mexico.
As a father of three who took my family for a 3-month trip around the world in 2016, I know all too well that family dynamics are not always easy. So I asked Will how taking off for a year as a high schooler and always being together with his younger brother and family worked for him.
So I got into sailing from a pretty young age. My parents actually took my brother and I out of high school. I was in grade 10 and my brother was in grade 7, and we did a 1-year circuit sailing down the California coast, down to Mexico, over to Hawaii, and then Hawaii back to Vancouver. So it was a 1-year time out, and we did correspondence schooling.
Barely.
Which my brother did basically half the curriculum. Yeah,
I've read the family stories so many times I almost feel like I was there, but the funniest is about how Will and his brother had to share the V-berth up front, and I think your mom made like a partition down the middle.
A wooden partition
In the V-berth.
Yeah. Let's just say there were some very steep learning curves for both of us. But you kind of adapt. It's just one of those things, you roll with the punches, and once you meet a few other boats with families on board and you develop some friends, it all sort of unfolds.
And so while Will grew up with boats and sailing, Sarah's story's a little different.
Yeah, my sailing experience is a lot more limited than Will's, I would say. I'd always thought it was kind of a cool idea. I actually grew up reading a book, a Canadian book called Kids for Sail, S-A-I-L, and it was my favorite book growing up, about a family who went sailing. And on Will and I, on our very first date, he was kind of telling me about some of the stuff that he'd done. I said, wow, I used to love this book. I used to beg my parents to take us out of school and go sailing, even though I'd never sailed before. And Will said,
I was blown away.
My family did that, and we were inspired by that book. So it was kind of this super random connection that we had right off the bat. And then on our very first date, Will said, well, I want to sail to the South Pacific. And I said, me too.
Fast forward 6 years, and lo and behold, their plans of crossing the Pacific together begins to become a reality. Before I go too much further, I should explain that Will and Sarah own a company by the name of Hydrovane, which manufactures and distributes a self-steering wind vane and emergency rudder system ideally suited for making long-distance passages.
So one of the things that we love is that we actually do get to work in the sailing and cruising industry. When I quit my job, which was in human resources, to go sailing, I actually joined the Curry family business, which is Hydrovane. So even though we were away sailing, we actually both are still trying to be connected and working at the same time.
It is amazing nowadays what you can achieve while you're cruising. We worked 80% of what we would do back home in the office.
They decided to name their boat HydroQuest and before long they had their car packed and were off to Mexico to move aboard her and start their cruising adventure.
I had to learn how to sail first. So I learned how to sail in Mexico on that boat.
Yeah. And basically we ended up doing what they call the coconut milk run, which is, east to west through the South Pacific, starting in Mexico, Marquesas, French Polynesia, and then on from there. And that's a fairly typical trade wind route.
Yeah, trade wind sailing.
Yeah,
sure.
and then we were just conscious of the seasons because you obviously don't want to be sailing in hurricane season. And our insurance actually made sure that we needed to be south, 24 degrees south, before hurricanes.
In Mexico.
Yeah.
Will and Sarah would end up spending 12 months in Mexico, getting to know their new boat and cruising the Mexican coast. Then, on March 28, 2013, the day came when it was time to shove off for all points west across the Pacific. Their track would take them first from Banderas Bay, Mexico, to the Marquesas Islands, a journey of 2,750 nautical miles and 19 days at sea. Personally, I love ocean sailing, especially at night, but it's not for everybody, and I was curious to know how Sarah, as a beginning sailor, took to making her first ocean passage.
As a total beginner, I still remember my very first night at sea. It was incredible. We had just bought the boat. We were I think only a few weeks into owning it. And we sailed from Guaymas down to Mazatlan. And my first night at sea, Will said, "Okay, I'm going to bed, you're on watch." And I still didn't really know what I was doing at that point, but it was so beautiful, it was so magical. And I realized, I couldn't really go wrong. I just had to enjoy the experience. So.
From the Marquesas, they would sail to the Tuamotus, then Moorea in the Society Islands, to Bora Bora, Tonga, Fiji, and eventually Australia. Sailing across the Pacific is not exactly a short undertaking, so an obvious question to ask was, how long did this take?
The trip in total was 2.5 years over the full span, but we spent the whole first season cruising in Mexico. So.
I actually compiled some really good the statistics on it, and from coast to coast, so from the day we left Mexico to the day that we made our amazing landfall in Australia, I think it was 7 months and 25 days or something, so just about 8 months for the actual South Pacific crossing.
Yeah, and out of that we were 51 nights at sea.
Yeah.
So full 24-hour period.
And how was it, I asked, doing the majority of this trip, just the two of you, together?
Sailing can definitely be hard in a marriage, make or break, but now we feel like we're solid for life, just having gone through the whole experience together.
The big part of it is learning your roles, and a lot of you probably heard the saying that cruising is fixing your boat in paradise. And because the reality is it's a complex piece of machinery, you got all these different systems on board, but one of the big things that made a difference for us was actually learning how to do things together.
Yeah.
Eventually, they would make their way to Sydney, where they would sell HydroQuest and head home to Vancouver.
So we sold that boat in Australia, and that was actually always our plan on the first trip, to sell the boat in Australia. Once we sold it, we came home. The first 6 months, we thought, this is kind of nice, no more boat projects.
We were so happy we didn't have any work to do on the boat.
And then after 6 months, we were like, wait a sec, this is boring. We need a boat. So the hunt began, and
we were looking specifically for Jeanneau. Actually, it was kind of the top boat on our list. The specific model of Jeanneau that we wanted showed up for sale right in our backyard. So
it was perfect. It was meant to be. Sounds cliche, but it was totally meant to be.
I remembered from their first seminar them talking about how they were big advocates of buying a production boat as opposed to a more custom, heavy displacement boat.
An interesting point was one of the things when we sold our first boat in Australia, we realized, especially in the Sydney market, they love production boats. Yeah. So that was one of the things when we were buying the second boat, was that we wanted to have a boat with a brand behind it. And that's how we ended up with Jeanneau. And we specifically wanted the 43 as well. the question of getting, taking a production boat across oceans and go blue water sailing, we get it all the time. And we're always
We
pretty
see it all the time.
we're always pretty adamant that you can certainly do it in any production boat, and people are crossing oceans in rafts.
We're definitely tradewind sailors, and for me, the most important thing for blue water is being comfortable, being in a boat that I trust, and being able to have a performance-oriented boat. I don't want to sit out there bobbing around in some big old clunky thing that can't move, in 10 knots of wind. I want to be making time. I want to be getting where we want to go. So I do actually think that's really, really important to have a more performance-oriented boat.
Yeah.
As our late afternoon sail aboard the 349 was winding down, I asked them one last question. Do you ever see yourselves not owning a boat? Do you ever see yourselves away from this life?
I don't think I could ever see us without a boat and doing some sort of cruising or adventures.
Now that we're doing it, and we've been cruising for 6 years, I say, our life aquatic, I don't see how we could be completely land-based again. We actually consider the boat home.
Yeah, when we got home for the first 6 months, we were just like, what is this? Like, nothing's changed. Whereas when you're cruising, every day is different. There's always something going on, and you're meeting some new person from some far-flung part of the world, or you're entrenched in a different culture, or you're just learning how to live in a new city. I mean, it's such an amazing way to travel, I think.
We're hooked.
We're hooked. We definitely got bitten by the bug hard.
Well, I certainly had a great time talking with Will and Sarah. KaiQuest is currently at LA Harbor in California, and for Will and Sarah, they have been busy with Hydrovane, traveling around to the many winter boat shows throughout the US and Canada, and internationally as well. But their plan is to keep moving KaiQuest south, and one day, in the near future, to take a sharp turn to the west, and once again, cruise across the Pacific to Australia. For the Jeanneau channel, this is Paul Fenn, and I'll see you next time, right here on Jeanneau Underway.